A millionaire throws his disabled daughter into the river, thinking he's erased his biggest shame forever. But 20 years later, he gets a shocking call that turns his entire world upside down. The child he thought was gone has survived, and she's no longer the helpless little girl he abandoned. She's powerful now, with a plan that will force him to face the darkest truth of his life. Will he finally pay the price for what he did? Or will the past come back even harder than he ever imagined? The morning sun cast golden ribbons across the gentle waters of the Maine coast, where Patrick Wynn's pristine yacht bobbed quietly at the private dock. The vessel's white hull gleamed like fresh snow against the deep blue water. At 60 feet long, the Sea Emperor was modest by billionaire standards, exactly the image Patrick wanted to project today. Patrick adjusted his casual sailing attire, a crisp white polo shirt and tailored navy shorts, checking his reflection in the yacht's polished surface. Everything had to look perfect, natural, fatherly. He practiced his warm smile, the one that had graced countless magazine covers and charity galas. "Ready for our adventure, sweetheart?" Patrick called out, his voice honey-sweet as he watched his assistant help Maisie's wheelchair up the dock's gentle slope. The 5-year-old's face lit up, her small hands clutching a well-loved stuffed rabbit with floppy ears and mismatched button eyes. "Yes, Daddy," Maisie beamed, her dark curls bouncing as she nodded enthusiastically. She wore a pink sundress with little sailboats printed on it, an outfit Patrick had specifically requested for today's photos. The matching life jacket sat ready on deck. Patrick dismissed his assistant with a wave and a generous tip. "Thank you, James. Enjoy your week off." He'd given the entire crew paid leave, insisting this trip was about quality time with his daughter. Just the two of them. With practiced gentleness, Patrick lifted Maisie's wheelchair onto the deck. The chair was lightweight, top-of-the-line carbon fiber, the best money could buy. Like everything else in Patrick's world, it was perfect on the surface, but perfection had never been enough for him. "Look, Daddy!" "Seagulls." Maisie pointed skyward, her stuffed rabbit bouncing in her lap. Patrick nodded, checking his watch. The weather system he'd arranged would be starting soon. As they pushed further out to sea, Patrick kept one eye on the gathering clouds. Right on schedule, the water began to chop and heave. He'd chosen this location carefully, where the conflicting currents would make any rescue effort particularly challenging. "It's getting bumpy," Maisie said, a slight tremor in her voice. She hugged her rabbit tighter. "Don't worry, Princess, Daddy's got you." Patrick secured her life jacket, or appeared to. His fingers worked quickly, leaving crucial straps intentionally loose while making a show of double-checking everything. The jacket would slip off easily when the time came. The waves grew larger, sending spray across the deck. Patrick had activated the weather manipulation devices hours earlier, carefully placed to create a perfect storm. Not too big, that would draw suspicion, but enough to make an accident believable. Maisie's wheelchair rocked with each wave. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Here, let me move you somewhere safer." Patrick wheeled her closer to the rail, positioning her exactly where he needed her. His hands were steady as he engaged the brake. The next wave hit hard, sending water cascading across the deck. In one fluid motion, Patrick released the wheelchair's brake. "Maisie!" he shouted, loud enough for the voice recorder in his pocket to pick up. "Hold on." The wheelchair slid. Maisie screamed, her small hands grasping for purchase as the chair tipped toward the churning water. The loose life jacket slipped up around her shoulders as she fell. Patrick reached out, not to grab her, but to ensure she cleared the rail completely. The splash was swallowed by the roar of the waves. He waited exactly 45 seconds before activating the distress beacon. The capsized dinghy was already in position, part of his carefully orchestrated scene. Patrick dove into the water, counting the minutes precisely. When he surfaced alone, his face showed exactly the right mix of desperation and exhaustion. The Coast Guard arrived with impressive speed. They'd been positioned nearby thanks to an anonymous tip about potential weather concerns in the area. Patrick clung to the rescue ladder, his body shaking with what looked like cold and grief. "My daughter," he gasped between sobs. "Please. My little girl." The search would be thorough but futile. Patrick had studied the currents for months. By the time they marked this area for recovery rather than rescue, Maisie would be far beyond finding. Hours later, Patrick sat in his mansion's study, wrapped in an expensive wool blanket. Camera crews clustered outside the gates, their lights creating artificial day in the growing dusk. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of sympathy and support. "Mr. Wynn?" His lawyer entered quietly, carrying a leather portfolio. "I have the papers you requested." Patrick nodded, his face a mask of grief. The will needed to be changed quickly, before any questions could arise. He'd already arranged for Maisie's considerable trust fund to be redistributed to his charitable foundation, another public relations coup in the making. The lawyer laid out the documents. Patrick's hand didn't shake as he signed each page, officially erasing Maisie from his legacy. When they finished, he walked to the massive stone fireplace that dominated the room. Maisie's stuffed rabbit sat on the mantel, still damp from the sea. Patrick picked it up, feeling the worn fabric under his fingers. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes. Not quite regret, but perhaps the faintest recognition of what he'd done. The moment passed. Patrick tossed the rabbit into the flames, watching as the fire consumed the last physical reminder of his daughter's existence. The button eyes melted first, then the floppy ears curled and blackened. Within minutes, there was nothing left but ash. The first light of dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Evelyn Carr made her way along the rocky shoreline of her island sanctuary. The air was heavy with salt and seaweed after last night's storm, a familiar comfort to the retired marine biologist. Her boots crunched against the wet sand as she conducted her morning inspection of the beach, checking for any damage or interesting specimens washed up by the turbulent waters. 10 miles from the mainland, her private island stood as a testament to her desire for solitude. The waves lapped at the shore with a rhythmic persistence, bringing with them the scattered remains of the storm's fury, branches, shells, and tangles of seaweed. But this morning something unusual caught her eye, a flash of blue fabric barely visible among the dark strands of kelp. Evelyn quickened her pace, her experienced eyes scanning the debris field. Years of marine research had taught her to notice patterns, to spot things that didn't belong. The fabric moved with the gentle morning breeze, leading her gaze to a larger mass of driftwood several yards away. Her heart stopped. There, clinging to a weathered piece of wood, was a small figure, a child. Dark curls plastered against pale skin, pink dress torn and waterlogged. "Dear God," Evelyn whispered, breaking into a run. Her boots splashed through the shallow water as she reached the girl. Small hands were locked in a death grip around the driftwood, knuckles white even in unconsciousness. The child's skin was cold to the touch, but when Evelyn pressed fingers to her neck, she found a pulse, weak but steady. With the strength born of years handling marine equipment, Evelyn lifted the girl into her arms. The child was light, too light, and completely unresponsive. But she was breathing. She was alive. Evelyn's cabin sat back from the shore, a sturdy structure built to withstand coastal storms. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, and a small satellite dish, rarely used but maintained for emergencies, stood sentinel near the back door. She carried the girl inside, heading straight for the medical room she'd maintained since her research days. The room remained fully equipped, another habit she'd never broken. Evelyn laid the child on the examination table, efficiently stripping away the wet clothes. She worked quickly, wrapping the small body in warming blankets and setting up an IV for fluids. The girl's core temperature was dangerously low, but Evelyn had treated hypothermia before, both in humans and marine mammals. Hours passed as Evelyn monitored vital signs, adjusted blankets, and carefully warmed her young patient. The sun had begun its descent when the girl's eyelids finally fluttered. Dark eyes opened, wide with fear and confusion. "You're safe," Evelyn said softly, keeping her movements slow and gentle. "You're going to be okay." The child's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around the room, panic rising in her expression. "Shh," Evelyn soothed. "Don't try to talk yet, just rest." But the girl was becoming increasingly agitated, her breathing rapid and shallow. Evelyn recognized the signs of trauma response, something she'd seen too often in rescued animals. She needed to establish trust, to create a safe space. Moving carefully, Evelyn retrieved her old research journals from a nearby shelf. She opened to a page filled with colorful sketches of sea life, dolphins, whales, and bright tropical fish. The girl's breathing slowed as she focused on the drawings. "Would you like to see more?" Evelyn asked quietly. When the child nodded, Evelyn pulled her chair closer, turning pages slowly. "This is a humpback whale," she explained, pointing to a detailed illustration. "See how it jumps? They do that for fun sometimes, just like children playing." A tiny hand reached out to touch the page. Evelyn smiled encouragingly. "And these are sea turtles. They swim thousands of miles across the ocean, but they always remember their way home." As the evening wore on, Evelyn continued showing drawings and telling gentle stories about ocean creatures. The girl remained silent, but her body gradually relaxed. When Evelyn brought soup, she ate slowly, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. Later that night, after settling the child in a warm bed, Evelyn sat by her fireplace and opened her laptop. The satellite internet connection, usually ignored, brought up news feeds filled with a familiar face. Patrick Wynn, billionaire philanthropist, grieving father. The photos showed him at a press conference, his handsome features arranged in an expression of devastating loss. Headlines praised his strength, his dignity in the face of tragedy. Evelyn's jaw tightened as she read about the terrible accident, the heroic attempt to save his daughter. Something made her turn the laptop, showing the screen to the child who had silently entered the room. The girl took one look at Patrick's smiling face and turned away, her small body trembling. In that moment, Evelyn understood with crushing clarity. She'd seen that same reaction in injured animals when confronted with their abusers. This child hadn't been lost. She'd been thrown away, discarded like unwanted cargo by a man who now played the grieving father for the cameras. Evelyn closed the laptop with a decisive click. From a drawer, she retrieved the newspaper page that listed the child's legal identity. Maisie Wynn, age 5, presumed dead in a boating accident. Without hesitation, she fed the page into the flames, watching as the fire consumed the words. The girl watched the paper burn, her face illuminated by the firelight. Evelyn drew her close, feeling the child's heartbeat against her side. "No one will ever hurt you again," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. 3 days after finding Maisie, Evelyn guided her wheelchair along a narrow path that wound through tall seagrass. The morning air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of salt and pine that defined their island sanctuary. She had spent the previous nights modifying an old powered wheelchair from her research days, fitting it with reinforced wheels and better suspension to handle the uneven coastal terrain. "Almost there," Evelyn said softly, noting how Maisie's hands still gripped the armrests with nervous tension. The child remained silent, but her dark eyes took in everything, watching, learning, processing. The path opened onto a sheltered cove, where gentle waves lapped at smooth stones. Sunlight danced across the water's surface, creating patterns that seemed to mesmerize the young girl. Evelyn parked the manual wheelchair and brought forward the modified powered one. "This is for you," she explained, demonstrating the simple controls. "See? This makes it go forward, and this turns it. You can explore the whole cove on your own." Maisie's eyes widened as she looked at the chair, then at Evelyn. There was a flash of something in her expression. Hope, perhaps, or the first hint of trust. Evelyn helped her transfer into the powered chair, making sure she was secure before stepping back. "Try it," she encouraged. "Just a gentle touch." Maisie's small hand hesitated over the control pad. Then, slowly, she pressed forward. The chair moved smoothly across the packed sand, and something magical happened. Maisie smiled. It was small and fleeting, but it transformed her entire face, chasing away some of the shadows that had haunted her eyes since her rescue. Encouraged by this breakthrough, Evelyn retrieved a weathered canvas bag from behind a rock. She pulled out several laminated cards featuring colorful illustrations of sea life, along with some basic reading primers she'd saved from her teaching days. "Would you like to learn about what lives in these waters?" she asked. settling onto a flat rock as Maisie steered the chair closer. "This is a harbor seal," she pointed to one card. "And here's a starfish, though scientists actually call them sea stars." Throughout the morning, they worked through the cards. Evelyn was impressed by how quickly Maisie absorbed the information, her eyes lighting up with each new discovery. When they moved on to basic letters and numbers, the child showed the same keen interest, tracing shapes in the sand with a stick when her voice still wouldn't come. As months passed, their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were spent on lessons, with Evelyn adapting her old university materials to suit Maisie's growing abilities. The girl's silence gradually gave way to whispered questions, then full conversations, her natural curiosity breaking through the walls of trauma. One evening, while Maisie slept, Evelyn sat at her computer, carefully constructing a false report through encrypted channels. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard as she detailed the discovery of remains matching Maisie's description, too degraded for DNA testing but carrying enough identifying markers to be convincing. She knew this deception was necessary. It would ensure their safety, allowing the world to close the book on Maisie Wynn's tragic story. With that final seal in place, Evelyn began the process of building a new identity. Maisie Wynn disappeared completely, and May Carrington emerged, named after the bay where Evelyn had found her. The girl took to her new name easily, as if shedding an old skin that had brought only pain. May's intelligence blossomed like a flower reaching for sunlight. She devoured books on marine biology, showing particular interest in how creatures adapted to survive in hostile environments. When Evelyn brought out old mechanical equipment from her research days, May's eyes lit up with fascination. She wanted to understand how everything worked, from the simplest pulley to the complex systems that powered their solar arrays. But it was their discussions on ethics that truly revealed May's depth. She asked profound questions about right and wrong, about justice and mercy, about why some people hurt others. Evelyn answered as honestly as she could, watching as May processed these complex ideas with remarkable clarity. 1 year after the rescue, on May's 6th birthday, Evelyn prepared a special surprise. She decorated their small dining room with hand-drawn pictures of sea creatures, May's artwork now mixed with her own. On the table sat 2 carefully wrapped packages. May's eyes grew wide as she opened the first one, revealing a child-sized lab coat with Dr. May Carrington embroidered on the pocket. The second package contained a professional-grade microscope, perfectly sized for small hands. "This is real," May whispered, running her fingers over the microscope's smooth surface. "Like yours?" "Just like mine," Evelyn confirmed, helping her put on the lab coat. "Now you can do your own research." May looked up at her, eyes bright with purpose. "I want to fix people," she said firmly. "Like you fixed me." Evelyn's heart swelled as she pulled May into a tight hug, remembering the broken child she'd found on the beach a year ago. This bright, determined girl was a testament to resilience, to the power of love over cruelty. Later that evening, after May had fallen asleep still wearing her lab coat, Evelyn stood before the corkboard in her study. It was covered with newspaper clippings and printouts, a chronicle of Patrick Wynn's continued success and immunity from consequences. Articles praised his business acumen, his charitable works, his strength in moving forward after tragedy. She pulled a fresh article from her printer. Patrick Wynn announces Wynn Tech expansion. The photo showed him cutting a ribbon at a new facility, his smile as practiced and hollow as ever. She pinned it to the board with steady hands. Small footsteps made her turn. May stood in the doorway, her new lab coat gleaming white in the dim light. Without a word, she wheeled forward, picked up a red marker, and carefully drew a circle around the article. Her face showed no anger, only quiet determination as she completed the perfect red ring around her father's smiling face. May peered through the microscope, her dark eyes narrowing in concentration as she adjusted the fine focus knob. At 10 years old, her movements were precise and deliberate, reflecting years of careful training under Evelyn's guidance. The plant cell sample, carefully prepared from a leaf they'd collected that morning, came into sharp focus beneath the lens. "The chloroplasts are really active today," May observed, making careful notes in her lab journal. Her handwriting was neat and methodical, each observation recorded with scientific accuracy, that would impress most high school students. "I think the new nutrient solution is working." Evelyn smiled, leaning against the desk in May's room, a space that had evolved far beyond a typical child's bedroom. Biotech textbooks lined custom-built shelves, their spines showing frequent use. A workbench held partially assembled wheelchair modifications, evidence of May's growing engineering skills. In one corner, a cluster of salvaged computers hummed quietly, running various AI learning programs May had coded herself. "Excellent observation," Evelyn said, checking May's notes. "What else do you notice about the cell structure?" May adjusted her posture in her wheelchair, a heavily modified version she'd helped design. While she could walk short distances with her leg braces, she preferred the chair for its efficiency and the integrated system she'd built into it. "The cell wall looks thicker than our control sample. I think the calcium supplements are having an effect." The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating May's workspace. Her desk was arranged with scientific precision, microscope, slides, and testing equipment all within easy reach. Above the desk, a corkboard displayed printouts of their published papers, all under carefully chosen pseudonyms, their work quietly contributing to the scientific community through anonymous channels. Over the next 2 years, their days took on an intense rhythm of learning and discovery. Evelyn structured May's education like a university program, building on her natural talents while ensuring she developed a strong ethical framework. "Remember," Evelyn would say during their biotech sessions, "every advancement must serve a purpose beyond itself. We're not just creating technology, we're shaping the future." May absorbed these lessons eagerly, her mind constantly connecting different fields of study. She would spend mornings working with genetic sequences, afternoons coding AI algorithms, and evenings discussing environmental ethics. Her wheelchair-integrated AI assistant, which she named VOX, began as a simple navigation aid, but grew more sophisticated with each iteration. "Voice interface online," Vox announced one autumn morning, its tone warm and natural, the result of countless hours of programming. "Good morning, May. Your schedule shows a tutorial session in 20 minutes. The online tutors, carefully selected and connected through encrypted channels, helped expand May's education beyond what Evelyn alone could provide. Each specialist worked with an anonymized version of May, never knowing her true identity but consistently amazed by her capabilities. "Your student's grasp of neural network architecture is remarkable," one tutor told Evelyn during a private conference. "She's operating at a graduate level already." During this period, Evelyn received an encrypted message that caught her attention. It detailed a minor investigation into Patrick Wynn's offshore accounts, nothing that would threaten his empire yet, but a crack in his carefully maintained facade. "Look at this," Evelyn said, showing May the information on their secure terminal. "Someone's finally asking questions." May studied the data, her expression thoughtful. "The pattern recognition is poor," she noted. "They're missing connections. Vox, can you run a deep scan on public records relating to these account numbers?" "Scanning," VOX responded, "cross-referencing with global financial databases." Together, May and Evelyn began carefully feeding information to selected ethical hackers, using May's growing network of AI tools to ensure their anonymity while exposing threads of Patrick's financial web. They were patient, methodical, building a case that would be impossible to ignore when finally revealed. "It's like dismantling a spider's web," May explained during one of their strategy sessions. "Pull the wrong thread too quickly, and the spider knows. But if you work slowly, carefully." On a cool evening in early spring, just after May's 12th birthday, they sat in their study watching a live stream of the annual Business Innovation Awards. The room was dim, lit mainly by the glow of multiple monitors displaying various data feeds and analysis programs. Patrick Wynn stood at the podium, accepting yet another award with practiced humility. His smile was perfect, his suit immaculate, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. "Innovation isn't just about technology," he was saying. "It's about creating a better world for our children." May's face showed no emotion as she watched, but her fingers moved steadily across her keyboard, Vox silently logging and analyzing every detail of Patrick's speech and body language. The screens around them displayed scrolling data, stock prices, social media reactions, financial transactions occurring in real time. "We're going to take everything," May said quietly, her voice carrying the same clinical precision she used when recording lab results. Her eyes never left the screen where Patrick continued his acceptance speech. Evelyn placed a gentle hand on May's shoulder. "But we do it right," she reminded her. "No shortcuts, no violence." May nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on Patrick's image for a moment longer than necessary, her expression unreadable in the blue light of the monitors. May sat at her customized workstation, surrounded by multiple high-resolution displays. Her fingers moved steadily across an ergonomic keyboard as she made final adjustments to her presentation slides. The clock showed 8:57 a.m., 3 minutes until she would present her groundbreaking research to the International Conference on Neural Engineering, streaming live to thousands of researchers worldwide. "Final sound check complete," Vox announced through her headset. "Connection stable. Presentation materials uploaded and verified." The neural-mapped prosthetics paper represented years of careful research, combining biological interfaces with adaptive AI systems. While the work would be presented under her pseudonym, Dr. M. Carter, the implications would ripple through the scientific community. "Remember," Evelyn said, standing beside May's chair and squeezing her shoulder gently, "keep the technical details clear, but don't reveal too much about the implementation. We need to protect the core innovations." May nodded, pulling up the conference interface on her main screen. Faces began appearing in the gallery view, researchers from prestigious institutions around the world, all waiting to hear from the mysterious Dr. Carter, whose previous papers had shown such promise. "Welcome, Dr. Carter," the conference moderator said as May's audio connected. "We're honored to have you present today. The floor is yours." May's voice was steady and professional as she began her presentation, carefully modulated through Vox's voice alteration protocols to maintain her anonymity. "Thank you. Today I'll be presenting our team's work on adaptive neural mapping for advanced prosthetic systems." The presentation flowed smoothly as May walked through the revolutionary approach, a combination of bio-responsive materials and AI-driven neural interface adaptation that could dramatically improve prosthetic functionality. She had carefully constructed each slide to demonstrate the breakthrough without revealing the proprietary elements that made it possible. Questions from the audience showed immediate recognition of the work's importance. "Dr. Carter, the learning rate you're showing for neural adaptation is unprecedented," one researcher commented. "How are you achieving such rapid synchronization?" May answered carefully, sharing enough to validate the research while protecting the core innovations. Meanwhile, Vox was quietly logging every question and comment, analyzing the researchers' reactions and identifying potential opportunities or threats. As the presentation concluded, May's inbox began filling with partnership inquiries. Universities, research institutions, and biotech companies all wanted to collaborate with the brilliant Dr. Carter. Evelyn had prepared for this, setting up a network of shell companies and secure communication channels. Over the next few months, Carrington Biosolutions took shape through careful planning and strategic partnerships. The company existed primarily in the digital space, with Evelyn handling all direct communications while May focused on the technical work. Their office was virtual. Their employees carefully vetted contractors who never knew the full scope of their work. Another licensing request from Stanford's bioengineering department, Evelyn noted one afternoon, reviewing their secure communications. They want to integrate Vox's framework into their research platforms. May looked up from her workstation, where multiple screens displayed complex technical diagrams and code sequences. "Approve it," she said. "The more researchers using Vox, the better our data collection becomes." The open-source version of Vox had spread steadily through the research community, each installation providing valuable usage data while establishing their technology as an industry standard. Meanwhile, the advanced version May used grew increasingly sophisticated, integrating new capabilities and learning from the network of installations worldwide. Carrington Biosolutions grew methodically, each success building on the last. May directed their profits into expanding their capabilities, advanced computing resources, research partnerships, and carefully chosen acquisitions. But beneath the company's legitimate growth, she maintained another database, meticulously mapping Patrick Wynn's business empire. "Vox, display Wintech Holdings map," May commanded one evening, her screens filling with intricate diagrams showing corporate structures, subsidiaries, and financial relationships. "Highlight recent acquisitions and cross-reference with market movements." "Display updated," Vox responded. "Notable pattern detected in sector trading volumes preceding Wintech's recent merger announcements." May studied the data carefully, her expression focused as she traced connections between trading patterns and corporate announcements. Years of watching Patrick's business moves had taught her to recognize his strategies, the careful manipulation hidden beneath legitimate-seeming transactions. The clock on May's screen struck midnight as she monitored the financial news feeds. A press release appeared. "Wintech acquires Neurotron Systems in surprise move." May's fingers moved quickly across her keyboard, pulling up market data from the weeks preceding the announcement. "Vox, analyze trading patterns for Neurotron Systems stock last 30 days, she commanded. Cross-reference with known Wintech subsidiary accounts. The AI's analysis appeared on her screen, showing clear patterns of coordinated trading activity. Small purchases through multiple accounts, carefully timed to avoid detection, had slowly accumulated a significant position before the acquisition was announced. "Classic insider trading pattern," May murmured, marking the timestamp on the announcement. She began methodically downloading related press releases, financial statements, and trading records, organizing them into a comprehensive document. Opening a secure connection, May began drafting a whistleblower tip, carefully structuring the information to lead investigators toward the evidence without revealing her role as the source. Each document was selected to tell a story that regulators couldn't ignore, showing clear patterns of insider trading while protecting her identity. "Let's start bleeding the empire," May said quietly, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had prepared for this moment for years. The screens around her displayed the evidence of Patrick's financial manipulation, each piece carefully collected and preserved, ready to be deployed in a campaign of methodical exposure. The morning sun filtered through the reinforced windows of May's command center, a sophisticated setup of servers, monitors, and custom-built hardware that occupied what was once the cabin's spare bedroom. At 19, May had grown into a formidable presence, her quiet intensity matched only by her strategic patience. She watched multiple news feeds simultaneously, while VOX processed data streams. The headline that caught her attention read, "Federal investigators launch inquiry into Wintech Holdings." A slight smile crossed her face as she adjusted her position in her wheelchair. "Vox, compile the morning's coverage on the Wintech probe," May instructed, her voice steady and controlled. "Analyzing 17 major outlets," Vox responded. "Sentiment tracking shows increasing skepticism toward Patrick Wynn's public statement dismissing the investigation." May opened a secure messaging channel to her carefully assembled team, ethical hackers she'd recruited through years of building trust in underground forums. None knew her real identity. They knew her only as Phoenix, a handle she'd chosen for its symbolism of rising from ashes. "Team, the first domino has fallen," she typed. "Proceed with Phase 2, focus on the Singapore accounts." Across the room, multiple screens displayed complex financial records, each representing a piece of Patrick's carefully hidden empire. May had spent years mapping these connections, finding the weak points where pressure could be applied. The door opened quietly as Evelyn entered, moving more slowly than she used to. "Martin Chen resigned this morning," she said, referring to Wintech's chief financial officer. His statement mentioned irreconcilable ethical concerns. May nodded, her eyes still on the screens. He was always the weak link. Too much conscience for Patrick's taste. She pulled up Chen's resignation letter, which had already been leaked to 3 major business news sites. "The timing is perfect. It validates the investigation without seeming coordinated." Evelyn settled into her chair, her movements careful and measured. "May," she said softly, "we need to talk about containment." May turned her wheelchair to face her adoptive mother. At 19, she'd grown into her features, sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a composed expression that rarely betrayed emotion. "We're clean," she assured. "Every leak is routed through 7 layers of proxies. The team thinks they're working for a whistleblower inside Wintech." "It's not just about digital traces," Evelyn pressed. "The closer we get to exposing him, the more desperate he'll become. Patrick isn't just ruthless in boardrooms, he's ruthless everywhere." May's expression softened slightly. "I know. That's why we're not just taking him down. We're dismantling every support structure he has first. By the time he realizes what's happening, he'll have nowhere to turn." The conversation paused as May received an alert. She quickly pulled up a video feed showing a children's rehabilitation center in Boston. Young patients were testing the first generation of her neural-mapped mobility assists, wheelchairs and prosthetics that responded to thought patterns with unprecedented precision. "The Griffin Foundation trials are exceeding expectations," May said, allowing herself a moment of pride. The foundation, named for the mythological guardian, was her other project, funded through a complex network of shell companies. "These kids will have opportunities I never did." Evelyn watched the feed, her eyes misting slightly. "You've done remarkable things, May. Maybe that's enough." A crack of thunder interrupted her words. The storm that had been threatening all day had arrived, battering the reinforced windows of their island home. Evelyn stood to check the weather station, but suddenly gripped the desk, her knees buckling. "Mom!" May moved swiftly, catching Evelyn before she could fall. Despite her own physical limitations, years of upper body training had made her strong. She helped Evelyn to the small medical bay they maintained. "I'm fine," Evelyn protested weakly as May checked her vital signs. "Just a spell of dizziness." May's hands were steady as she worked, but her voice trembled slightly. "Your blood pressure's low. When did you last eat?" "I've been busy with the satellite maintenance," Evelyn started, but May was already preparing a nutrient solution. "You have to take care of yourself," May said firmly, though fear flickered behind her composed expression. "I need you." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. They both knew that Evelyn was more than just a guardian or mentor. Later that night, after May had ensured Evelyn was stable and resting, the storm continued to rage outside. May sat beside Evelyn's bed, holding her hand as rain lashed against the windows and wind howled through the trees. "May," Evelyn said softly, her voice tired but clear, "will it be worth it? All this?" The power flickered, emergency lights casting soft blue shadows across the room. May squeezed Evelyn's hand gently, thinking of all the years of preparation, all the careful steps that had led to this moment. "Only if no one like me is ever left behind again," May whispered, her voice carrying both determination and a deep, quiet pain. Thunder rolled across the island as Evelyn's grip tightened on May's hand. In that moment, mother and daughter sat in silence, listening to the storm and thinking of the other tempest they had unleashed, one that would soon engulf the man who had once thought he could discard a child and face no consequences. The backup generators hummed steadily as another power fluctuation dimmed the lights, but neither woman moved. They had weathered worse storms than this, and they would weather what was to come, together. The sleek conference room in Reykjavik hummed with activity as May's team prepared for the official launch of Carrington Biosolutions. At 23, May had transformed from a hidden prodigy into a corporate force, though few would ever see her true face. She sat in her custom wheelchair, reviewing the final details of her presentation, while technicians adjusted the elaborate virtual background and voice modulation system. "Security protocols are in place," Vox announced through her earpiece. "All feeds will route through our protected servers. No direct video capture devices are allowed in the presentation hall." May nodded, her fingers moving swiftly across her tablet. The spinal implant system she was about to unveil represented years of research and development, a breakthrough that would allow patients with severe spinal cord injuries to regain significant mobility. She had tested every component herself, refined every circuit, and ensured the technology would be accessible to those who needed it most. 5 minutes to broadcast, her communications director announced. The woman, like all of May's senior staff, had been carefully vetted and had signed unprecedented non-disclosure agreements. They knew their CEO's preference for privacy was non-negotiable. The launch went perfectly. May appeared to the world as a sophisticated silhouette against a shifting Nordic landscape, her voice carrying authority despite its digital modification. The medical community watched in awe as she demonstrated the implant system's capabilities through clinical trial footage. When she announced that the technology had already received fast-track approval from major regulatory bodies, the stock market responded immediately. Across the Atlantic in his mahogany-lined study, Patrick Wynn slammed his tablet onto his desk. The financial news couldn't stop talking about Carrington Biosolutions and its mysterious founder. His company's stock had dropped 5% simply because this upstart had mentioned entering the medical technology sector. "Get me everything on May Carrington," he barked into his phone. "I want to know where she came from, who backs her, everything." His team of analysts worked through the night, but their findings were frustratingly vague. May Carrington had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, with a string of brilliant patents and a company structure that was perfectly legal yet impossible to penetrate. No photographs existed. No university records could be found. The company's headquarters in Iceland was real, but all meetings were conducted virtually. "Sir," his head of intelligence reported, "we've traced some of her shell companies, but they're just more shells. It's like following smoke." Patrick paced his study, pausing to stare at the awards that lined his walls. He had built his empire through careful control of information and strategic elimination of threats. But this was different. This felt personal, though he couldn't explain why. Meanwhile, in a secure room deep within her Iceland facility, May was building a different kind of wall. Private investigators, carefully chosen and compartmentalized, had been feeding her information about mysterious deaths connected to WinCorp over the years. Each victim's name was digitally pinned to an encrypted archive, their stories meticulously documented. "Thomas Chen, age 45, she read aloud. "Environmental engineer who discovered toxic waste dumping in 2015. Car accident 3 days before his testimony to regulators." She added his file to the growing collection. "Sarah Martinez, age 38, internal auditor who flagged irregular payments to offshore accounts. Apparent suicide, though her family insisted she had no history of depression." Another file added. "Vox cross-referenced these incidents with WinCorp's major project timelines," May instructed. "Pattern identified," Vox responded after a moment. 87% of suspicious deaths occurred within 2 weeks of potential exposure of corporate misconduct. May leaned back in her wheelchair, her expression grim. Each name represented a life cut short, a family destroyed, all to protect Patrick's empire. She had known about his cruelty firsthand, but seeing the full scope of it laid out before her was still shocking. At her private residence, Evelyn moved slowly through the living room, her hands slightly shaking as she carried a stack of legal documents. Age had begun to wear on her, but her mind remained sharp. She found May in her study, still reviewing the investigation files. "It's time we discussed this," Evelyn said, placing the papers on May's desk. "The will needs to be finalized." May looked up, momentarily startled. "Mom, you don't need—" "Not mine," Evelyn interrupted gently. "Yours. We need to be prepared. For anything." Understanding dawned in May's eyes. As she began to review the documents, her expression grew solemn. Together, they spent hours crafting the provisions: substantial endowments for children's hospitals, research grants for ethical biotechnology, support for families affected by corporate negligence. Everything she had built would serve to protect others like her. "In case something happens," May explained softly, signing the final page. Evelyn nodded, her eyes misting slightly as she added her signature as witness. That evening, May prepared for her first live-streamed keynote address as May Carrington. The virtual auditorium was packed with journalists, investors, and medical professionals from around the world. Her image appeared on the massive screens, a silhouette that commanded attention despite its deliberate obscurity. The presentation was flawless. May outlined her company's vision for accessible medical technology, announced new research initiatives, and handled questions with practiced ease. Then came the moment she had been waiting for. "Ms. Carrington," a reporter called out, "there are rumors that Wynn Corp is interested in a potential partnership. Any comments on that?" The audience fell silent, waiting. May allowed herself a small smile behind her digital mask. "Wynn Corp?" she replied, her modulated voice carrying clearly through the virtual space. "We don't deal with empires built on broken backs." The crowd erupted into excited murmurs. In his study, Patrick Wynn watched the live stream, his knuckles white as he gripped his armchair. Something about that voice, even through the modulation, sent a chill down his spine, though he couldn't understand why. Patrick Wynn stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city lights blur through the bottom of his crystal whiskey glass. His reflection showed a man changed by time, hair now steel gray, face lined with the weight of decades spent building and protecting his empire. At 68, he felt every one of those years in his bones. The whiskey didn't taste right anymore, nothing did. For weeks now, a persistent nausea had plagued him, along with a bone-deep exhaustion he couldn't shake. The glass trembled slightly in his hand, another new development he refused to acknowledge. His phone buzzed again, probably Andrews from legal with more updates about the latest round of audits. 3 different regulatory bodies had launched investigations into various corners of his business empire. Small ones, supposedly routine, but they kept multiplying like cancer. "Damn vultures," he muttered, taking another sip. The whiskey burned going down, making his stomach clench. He set the glass down harder than intended, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. His personal assistant had left another message about scheduling a doctor's appointment. He deleted it without reading. There wasn't time for that nonsense. Not with the board growing restless and stock prices sliding. Someone was feeding information to the authorities, he was sure of it. The question was who. Patrick moved to his desk, where multiple screens displayed financial news feeds and internal company metrics. Wynn Corp stock had dropped another 3% today. The headline crawling across one screen caught his eye. "Carrington Biosolutions announces major expansion into medical AI." His jaw clenched. That company again. That woman. Every time May Carrington made an announcement, his stock took a hit. She never attacked him directly, but her carefully worded statements about ethical business practices and corporate responsibility felt like arrows aimed at his heart. A fresh wave of nausea hit him. He grabbed the wastebasket just in time. Across the city, in a secure operations center, May's team, designated Echo, worked with precision. Screens filled with data streams and communication logs covered the walls. Each member had been carefully selected and vetted, their loyalty secured through a combination of generous compensation and shared ethical principles. "Package Alpha is ready for deployment," announced the lead data analyst, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards. "Confirmation from our contact at the SEC?" "Received and verified," another team member responded. "They're waiting for the trigger." May's voice came through the secure communication system, clear and authoritative. "Execute Protocol 7. Remember, controlled release only. We want ripples, not waves." The team acknowledged and began their carefully choreographed dance. Years of preparation had led to this moment. Hidden accounts were exposed through seemingly unrelated audit trails. Suspicious payment patterns emerged in apparently routine financial reviews. All roads led to Marcus Chen, Wynn Corp's CFO of 15 years. Within hours, federal agents were escorting Chen from Wynn Corp's headquarters in handcuffs. News helicopters captured the moment, broadcasting it live across all major networks. The charges: tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud shareholders. Patrick watched the footage from his office, his face ashen. Chen knew too much, had helped bury too many secrets. He immediately began making calls, activating his network of political connections and media contacts. Money flowed like water. Campaign contributions, advertising buys, speaking fees, consulting contracts, anything to create noise and confusion around the story. But this time, the usual tactics weren't working as well. Something had changed in the media landscape. Every attempted distraction met with pointed questions about corporate governance and financial transparency. In her private medical suite in Iceland, May sat beside Evelyn's hospital bed, holding her hand. The monitors beeped steadily, tracking vital signs that had only recently stabilized. The stroke had come without warning, a sudden collapse during their morning walk through the facility's indoor garden. "The doctors say you need to rest," May said softly, adjusting the blanket around Evelyn's shoulders. Evelyn's speech was slightly slurred but clear enough. "I've seen the news. Chen's arrest. Patrick's scrambling." "We can pause everything," May offered. "Focus on your recovery." "No." Evelyn's grip tightened on May's hand. "Don't stop the storm now. We're too close." May studied the face of the woman who had saved her, raised her, taught her everything about strength and justice. Even now, Evelyn's eyes burned with the same determination that had driven their mission for all these years. "Promise me," Evelyn insisted. "I promise," May whispered. A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Larson, May's chief of medical research, entered with a tablet in hand. Her expression was professionally neutral, but there was an undercurrent of excitement in her voice. "Ms. Carrington, we've received confirmation of something you'll want to see." May took the tablet, scanning the encrypted message. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the medical report that had been extracted from a private clinic in Switzerland. Patrick Wynne had finally seen a doctor. The diagnosis: a rare degenerative liver condition, aggressive and largely untreatable. Prognosis: 6 to 12 months. May looked up from the tablet, her eyes meeting Evelyn's. The coldness that crept into her expression wasn't hatred. It was something more clinical, more calculated. "Then it's time," she said simply. Moving to the secure wall safe hidden behind a painting, May pressed her palm to the biometric scanner. The safe opened with a soft hiss, revealing a sleek titanium briefcase. On its surface, etched in small, precise letters, were the words, "Wynne Protocol, Phase 2. The private hospital suite at Mount Sinai gleamed with sterile efficiency, its walls a pristine white that seemed to mock Patrick Wynne's increasingly sallow complexion. He sat propped up in the adjustable bed, surrounded by the trappings of wealth: imported silk pajamas, Egyptian cotton sheets, and a view of Central Park that cost extra. But none of it could mask the sharp smell of antiseptic or the quiet beeping of monitors. His trembling hands shuffled through the transplant documentation for the 100th time. The list of potential donors seemed to blur before his eyes. None viable, none matching, none willing. His liver was failing faster than the doctors had initially predicted. The experimental treatments had barely slowed the progression. Patrick's personal assistant, James, stood quietly in the corner, tapping away at his tablet. He'd been with Patrick for 15 years, managing everything from corporate takeovers to personal crises. But even he couldn't manufacture a compatible liver out of thin air. "Sir," James said suddenly, his voice carefully neutral, "I've just received a rather unusual communication." Patrick looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "Unless it's about a donor match, I don't want to hear it." "Actually, it is." James approached the bed holding out his tablet. "An anonymous donor has come forward. They're offering a living donor transplant, a liver segment. The preliminary testing shows." He paused, double-checking the information. "It's a perfect genetic match." Patrick snatched the tablet, his eyes racing over the medical data. "This is impossible," he muttered. "The odds of a random donor being this compatible." His voice trailed off as he studied the numbers. Everything looked legitimate: blood type, tissue markers, genetic compatibility factors. It was as if the donor had been custom-made for him. "Who is it?" he demanded. "They're insisting on anonymity until just before the procedure," James replied. "The donor's legal team has already submitted all necessary documentation. They're prepared to move forward immediately, pending your acceptance." Patrick's jaw clenched. He didn't like unknowns. Unknown factors were dangerous. They couldn't be controlled. But the alternative was death. and Patrick Wynne hadn't built an empire by accepting defeat. "Accept it," he ordered, "but I want to meet them before the surgery. No exceptions." The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The hospital's top surgical team was assembled. Security protocols were enhanced. Every staff member involved signed extensive non-disclosure agreements. Patrick's corporate lawyers vetted every document, every procedure, looking for any hint of threat or manipulation. The surgery was scheduled for dawn the following day. As evening approached, Dr. Harrison, the lead surgeon, came to brief Patrick one final time. "The donor has agreed to meet with you," she said, checking her watch. "They've requested a private conversation in one of our sterile consultation rooms. Hospital policy requires a nurse to be present, but they'll maintain distance for privacy." Patrick nodded, allowing an orderly to help him into a wheelchair. His body felt weak, but his mind remained sharp, analyzing every detail of this strange situation. The orderly wheeled him through quiet corridors, past multiple security checkpoints, finally arriving at a small, bright room. Standing by the window was a figure in a light blue surgical gown, face obscured by a surgical mask and protective head covering. A nurse stood discreetly by the door. The figure's posture was perfect, controlled, confident, almost regal. "Leave us," the figure said to the nurse, voice slightly muffled but carrying clear authority. The nurse hesitated, then nodded and stepped outside, closing the door. Patrick studied the mysterious donor carefully. Something about their bearing triggered a distant memory, but he couldn't place it. The figure reached up and slowly removed the surgical mask, then the protective covering. Time stopped. Patrick's world contracted to a single point of impossible reality. Standing before him was a face he'd last seen 20 years ago, older now, sharper but unmistakable. The same determined chin, the same intelligent eyes. But where there had once been innocent trust, there was now calculated purpose. Maisie. No, she went by May now. May Carrington. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. His daughter. The child he'd tried to dispose of like a failed investment. The empire-building rival he'd been unable to identify. They were one and the same. Patrick's legs gave out. He collapsed back into the wheelchair, mouth opening and closing without sound. The room seemed to spin around him as 2 decades of carefully constructed reality crumbled. May watched him with clinical detachment, not moving from her position by the window. She looked exactly like the business photos he'd seen, but now he understood why she'd always hidden her face in public appearances, why her company had seemed to rise from nowhere, fully formed and precisely targeted. "I'm alive," she said calmly, "because someone better than you saved me. Someone who saw value in what you tried to throw away." Her voice was steady, professional, the voice of a CEO addressing a business matter. "And I'm here to see if you're worth saving." Patrick struggled to form words, his throat constricting around questions he couldn't voice. May didn't wait for him to find his voice. "Here are my terms," she continued, pulling a document from a nearby table. "You will receive my liver segment after you make a full confession. Live television. Every crime, every cover-up, every person you've destroyed. Names, dates, methods, everything." She placed the document in front of him. "Sign this, and tomorrow morning you'll walk into a studio instead of an operating room. Tell the truth, all of it, and then you'll get your surgery. Refuse, and you can spend your remaining months watching your empire crumble piece by piece." Patrick stared at the paper, his hand shaking as he reached for it. May stepped back, her expression unchanged. "This is your one shot at redemption," she said. "You live broken, or you die the coward you are. The choice is yours." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You have until morning to decide." The orderly returned, wheeling a still speechless Patrick back to his room. The document sat in his lap like a burning coal. Behind him, May Carrington, his daughter, his nemesis, his potential savior, watched him go with eyes that held neither hatred nor mercy, only pure, unwavering purpose. Dawn crept over Manhattan, painting the hospital windows in pale gold. Patrick stood before the bathroom mirror in his private suite, his reflection a ghost of his former self. The confident mask he'd worn for decades had crumbled, revealing the hollow man beneath. His skin held a sickly yellow tinge, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's careful climate control. His hands trembled as he straightened his custom-tailored suit, a armor that no longer fit quite right. The fabric hung loose on his diminished frame. He'd insisted on wearing it instead of a hospital gown. If he was going to fall, he'd do it in Armani. The encrypted phone felt heavy in his pocket. He'd carried it for years, using it to orchestrate deals and destructions from behind layers of security. Now it would orchestrate his own undoing. Patrick pulled it out, staring at the screen for a long moment before pressing a single button. James answered immediately. "Sir?" "Set up the broadcast," Patrick whispered, his voice barely audible. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Get everyone." The machine began moving with practiced efficiency. James coordinated with major networks, while hospital staff transformed a conference room into a makeshift studio. Lighting rigs appeared, microphones were tested, and camera angles were calculated. Security teams swept the room repeatedly, checking for any threats to the billionaire who was about to destroy himself. Within hours, news alerts began buzzing across phones worldwide. Breaking: Patrick Wynn to make unprecedented live statement. Social media exploded with speculation. Business channels interrupted regular programming. In trading rooms across the globe, analysts pulled up Wynn Corp stock charts, fingers hovering over keyboards. The hospital conference room hummed with tension. 3 broadcast cameras faced a simple wooden chair positioned under harsh studio lights. No podium, no backdrop, nothing to hide behind. A small table held a single glass of water. Government agents in dark suits stood discreetly along the walls, their expressions carefully neutral. Patrick waited in a side room, listening to the growing murmur of reporters filing in. James appeared at his elbow with final details. "We're live in 5 minutes, sir. Streaming on all major platforms. Initial viewer count already passing 2 million. Patrick nodded mechanically. His mind kept returning to May's face, not as the powerful woman who'd confronted him yesterday, but as the trusting 5-year-old who'd smiled up at him from her wheelchair. He'd thrown that smile into the ocean, and now, 2 decades later, the tide was bringing it back to drown him. 30 seconds, called the production manager. Patrick walked slowly to the chair, each step feeling like lead. The lights were blinding, but he could sense the weight of countless eyes beyond them. Cameras tracked his movement. Reporters leaned forward in their seats. Someone counted down from 10. The red lights blinked on. Patrick Wynn, titan of industry, philanthropist, and master of public image, began to crumble. 20 years ago, he started, his voice rough, I murdered my daughter. The room went absolutely still. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. Her name was Maisie. His hands gripped the armrests. She was 5 years old. She had a stuffed rabbit named Hoppy. She loved the color blue. And his voice cracked. I pushed her off my yacht into a storm because she was disabled, because I saw her as a liability, because I was a monster wearing a suit. Tears began rolling down his cheeks, not the carefully measured tears he'd shed for cameras after the accident, but raw, ugly sobs that shook his entire body. I staged everything. The weather equipment to create the storm, the fake distress signals, the capsized dinghy. I watched her disappear under the waves, then played the grieving father for the cameras. His words came faster now, spilling out like poison. And that was just the beginning. For the next 2 hours, Patrick Wynn systematically dismantled his empire. He named board members who'd helped cover up toxic waste dumps. He detailed elaborate schemes to manipulate market prices. He listed the names of whistleblowers whose accidents had been carefully orchestrated. Shell companies, fake charities, bribed officials. Each revelation landed like a bomb in the stunned room. Reporters typed frantically on laptops. Government agents spoke quietly into earpieces. On trading screens across the world, Wynn Corp stock began its death spiral. The children's hospital wing with my name on it, Patrick continued, his voice hollow. Built with money laundered through fake cancer research foundations. The environmental awards, bought with bribes and blackmail. Every charitable gesture, every public triumph, it was all built on bodies I buried in paperwork. As he spoke, more agents arrived outside the hospital. Teams from the SEC, FBI, and other agencies prepared evidence collection protocols. Prosecutors updated indictment documents in real time. Patrick's strength was clearly fading. His skin had grown even paler, and his hands shook violently as he reached for the water glass. But he kept talking, emptying himself of 2 decades of secrets. Finally, as his voice dropped to barely a whisper, he looked directly into the main camera. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve mercy. I deserve to die alone with the truth of what I've done. And to my daughter." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry. Not that it matters now." The broadcast cut. Within seconds, agents moved in. Patrick offered his wrists without resistance as they read him his rights. The handcuffs looked absurdly large on his thin wrists. In a private viewing room several floors away, May sat rigidly in her chair. Her face remained carefully composed, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the armrests. Beside her, Evelyn watched from one of May's specially designed wheelchairs, a marvel of engineering that had helped her recover mobility after her stroke. Evelyn reached over and covered May's hand with her own. "He finally said it," she whispered, her voice gentle. May gave a single sharp nod. Her expression remained unreadable as she watched her father being led away by federal agents. "Now let him live with it," she said quietly. Outside the hospital, the world was already changing. WinCorp shares plummeted, triggering circuit breakers in multiple markets. Social media channels overloaded with reaction videos and commentary. Crowds began gathering outside WinCorp offices, their angry chants echoing through financial districts worldwide. Patrick was escorted to a secure wing of the hospital, where he would remain under 24-hour medical supervision and armed guard. His empire was falling, but he would live to watch every piece crash down around him. The sterile hospital room felt smaller than it had yesterday. Patrick lay propped up against stark white pillows, his skin nearly as pale as the sheets beneath him. Intravenous lines snaked from both arms, delivering a steady drip of medications that kept his failing body functioning. The morning sun filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across his gaunt face. A nurse in blue scrubs checked his vital signs, her movements efficient but gentle. "Good news, Mr. Wynn," she said, adjusting one of the IV bags. "Your transplant is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8. Dr. Chen wants you well rested." Patrick's lips curved into a faint smile, the first genuine one in days. After his public confession, he'd expected nothing but contempt from the hospital staff. But this nurse, like most of the others, maintained a professional kindness that felt almost like absolution. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Then, gathering what strength he could, he turned his head toward James Mitchell, his lawyer of 30 years, who sat in a corner chair reviewing documents. "James?" The attorney looked up, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. "Yes, Patrick?" "I'd like to write a letter." Patrick's fingers plucked weakly at the bedsheet. "To Maisie, to May, before tomorrow." James set aside his papers and studied his client carefully. They'd known each other long enough for the lawyer to read between the lines of any request. "To thank her?" he asked quietly. Patrick nodded, relief washing over his features. "Yes, to thank her." James stood, straightening his tie. "I'll get you some paper and a pen, and I'll make sure it's delivered." The nurse finished her checks and left the room as James returned with writing materials. He helped position a small lap desk across Patrick's legs and placed a Mont Blanc pen, one of Patrick's own, retrieved from his office, in his trembling hand. For nearly an hour, Patrick wrote slowly, frequently pausing to rest or gather his thoughts. The elegant penmanship that had once signed billion-dollar contracts was now shaky, but determined. James pretended to work while watching his client pour what remained of his soul onto the expensive stationery. Finally, Patrick set down the pen. "It's done," he said, folding the letter with unsteady fingers. James helped him slide it into an envelope and seal it. "I'll have this delivered immediately," James said, tucking the envelope into his briefcase. He'd already arranged for a courier service that specialized in high-security deliveries. Patrick closed his eyes, exhausted by the effort. "Thank you, James, for everything." The lawyer paused at the door, looking back at the diminished figure in the bed, a man he'd watched rise to incredible heights and fall to unimaginable depths. "Try to rest, Patrick. Tomorrow's a big day." Miles away, in a modernist mansion overlooking the Atlantic, May stood at floor-to-ceiling windows, watching waves crash against rocky cliffs. The house was her design, all clean lines and smart technology, with specialized accessibility features seamlessly integrated into every room. It was as far from Patrick's gilded Manhattan penthouse as she could make it. A discreet chime announced the arrival of a courier at the gate. May watched on a hidden screen as the delivery person passed multiple security checks before being allowed to approach the house. Moments later, her assistant brought in a single envelope on a silver tray. May recognized the handwriting immediately. She'd studied enough of Patrick's signatures over the years to know every curve and flourish. Without a word, she took the letter and retreated to her private study. The room was warm with afternoon sun streaming through polarized glass. May settled into her customized wheelchair, the latest prototype from her company's accessibility division, and broke the seal on the envelope. Her face remained perfectly still as she read, years of practice keeping her emotions hidden even in private. The letter was exactly what she'd expected. 4 pages of elegant self-pity masquerading as repentance. Patrick wrote of regret, of sleepless nights, of the weight of his crimes. He described the moment he'd recognized her in the hospital room as both a miracle and a judgment. He begged for understanding, if not forgiveness. The final paragraph was a masterwork of manipulation, suggesting that her offer of the transplant showed she still had love for him somewhere in her heart, that perhaps through this act of mercy, they could begin to heal together. May folded the letter precisely along its creases and set it aside. She remained motionless for several long minutes, staring out at the ocean that had both nearly killed her and saved her life. As darkness fell, she wheeled herself to her desk and opened a drawer containing her finest stationery, cream-colored paper with a subtle watermark. She selected a pen from a collection that included several Mont Blancs identical to the one Patrick had used, but she chose instead a simple ballpoint, black ink on white paper. No pretense, no elegance. Her hand trembled slightly as she began to write, but her words were steady and clear. When she finished, she read it once, then folded the single sheet carefully. "Are you sure?" May didn't turn at Evelyn's voice. She hadn't heard her mentor enter, but she wasn't surprised. Evelyn had always known when May needed her most. "Completely," May whispered, sliding the letter into a plain white envelope. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Patrick lay in the surgical prep area, a thin paper gown replacing his designer clothes. Pre-operative medications flowed through his IV, making him feel oddly peaceful. The transplant team moved around him with quiet efficiency, checking equipment and reviewing procedures. A nurse appeared with an envelope. "This just arrived for you, Mr. Wynn. Dr. Chen said you could read it before we begin." Patrick's hands shook with more than just weakness as he opened it. The single sheet contained only a few lines in precise handwriting. "I learned mercy from Evelyn, not from you. I lied. Goodbye, Father." His eyes widened as understanding hit. The monitors around him erupted in urgent beeping as his heart rate spiked dangerously. Medical staff rushed forward as a harsh, steady tone cut through the chaos, the sound of a flatline echoing across the room. The autumn wind carried a crisp chill across the Maine coastline as May sat in her home office, reviewing the morning's headlines. 3 weeks had passed since Patrick Wynn's death, and the media circus had finally begun to settle. The official cause was listed as complications from end-stage liver disease. No questions were raised about the missing transplant. The hospital had simply announced that the anonymous donor had withdrawn, citing medical complications. On her wall-mounted screens, financial networks continued to dissect the fall of Wynn Corp. Government investigators had seized most of Patrick's assets, uncovering decades of financial crimes that went far deeper than even his confession had revealed. Former executives were turning on each other daily, eager to secure immunity deals. The empire Patrick had built through corruption and cruelty was being dismantled piece by piece. Meanwhile, May Carrington's star continued to rise. Her latest neural interface breakthrough had revolutionized prosthetic technology, and her company's stock had doubled in the past month alone. She maintained her privacy through carefully managed virtual appearances, her face always obscured by sophisticated digital filters. The press had dubbed her the Ghost of Silicon Valley, a nickname that made her smile, given that she'd never set foot in California. "Vox," May called out to her AI assistant, "give me an update on the foundation launches." The AI's warm, gender-neutral voice filled the room. The Maisie initiative has successfully opened its first 5 locations. Construction is ahead of schedule on 7 more facilities across 3 continents. Initial enrollment in the tech education programs is at 127% of projected targets. May nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. Each facility was designed to be a sanctuary, part school, part medical center, part research hub. They prioritized children with disabilities and those who had been abandoned or abused. Every building was fully accessible, equipped with cutting-edge adaptive technology, and staffed by professionals who had been carefully vetted for their compassion as much as their credentials. "And the funding?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Donations continue to exceed expectations," Vox replied. "Corporate partnerships have increased by 40% since last week's announcement of the prosthetics program." May wheeled herself to the window, looking out at the ocean that had shaped her destiny. The foundation's name was her most public act of defiance, a way of reclaiming the identity she'd been forced to abandon. To the world, it was simply named after one of countless lost children. To her, it was a declaration. Maisie had survived, and she would ensure others did too. The sound of approaching wheels made her turn. Evelyn entered the office, moving slowly in the motorized wheelchair May had designed for her. Age and the recent stroke had taken their toll, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Ready for our walk?" Evelyn asked, a knowing smile on her face. May felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Always." They took the private elevator down to the ground level and emerged onto a winding path that led to the cove. May had purchased the entire island years ago, maintaining it as a wildlife sanctuary, while adding discreet security measures and accessibility features. The path they followed was smooth enough for their chairs but looked completely natural, one of many engineering feats May had accomplished in honor of her mentor. The cove opened before them, unchanged from the morning Evelyn had found a half-drowned child tangled in seaweed. Waves lapped gently at the shore, and seabirds wheeled overhead. They stopped at their usual spot, chairs side by side. "I remember every detail of that morning," Evelyn said softly. "The storm had been terrible. I almost didn't do my usual walk. But something pulled me down here." May reached over and took Evelyn's hand. "The universe has a way of putting the right people in the right place." "You were so small," Evelyn continued, her voice distant with memory. "So cold. But you held on with such strength. I knew then that you were meant to survive." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water dance with afternoon light. May thought about all the children now finding refuge in her facilities, each one carrying their own storms, each one deserving a chance to survive and thrive. "The foundation," Evelyn said, as if reading her thoughts. "It's beautiful work, May. Truly beautiful." May squeezed her hand. "I had the perfect example of how to save a life." Evelyn turned to face her, eyes bright with unshed tears. "You saved yourself, dear heart. I just gave you a safe place to do it." They continued their circuit of the cove, passing the spots where May had learned to identify different species of seaweed, where she'd conducted her first experiments, where she'd tested early prototypes of her wheelchair designs. Every inch of this shoreline held memories of healing and growth. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they made their way to the cliff overlook. May had installed a viewing platform with subtle safety features, a place where they could safely watch the sunset together. Evelyn's breathing had grown tired and she dozed lightly in her chair, wrapped in a warm blanket May had brought along. May engaged the brakes on both their chairs and carefully stood, gripping the railing for support. Her leg braces, the latest version of her own design, allowed her to stand comfortably for short periods. The wind played with her hair as she watched the waves roll endlessly toward shore. "Satellite link stable," Vox announced quietly through her earpiece. "Global donations surpassed 5 million today." May smiled, thinking of all the lives that money would change. "We're just getting started," she whispered to the ocean. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, while seabirds called their evening songs. Waves crashed below with the same rhythm they had followed for countless years. Here, where her second life had begun, May felt the weight of the past finally lift from her shoulders. The little girl who had been discarded had grown into a woman who would ensure no child ever felt worthless again. Beside her, Evelyn slept peacefully, her face serene. The tide continued its eternal dance, and the wind carried the promise of tomorrow on its wings. The morning news cycle buzzed with an endless stream of updates about the wind scandal. Every major network had dedicated entire segments to dissecting Patrick Wynn's empire and its spectacular collapse. Analysts and experts filled panel after panel, each offering their take on what would surely become one of the most significant corporate corruption cases in modern history. In her private office, May watched multiple screens simultaneously as Vox compiled and categorized the coverage. CNN showed footage of FBI agents escorting James Morrison, Wynn Corp's chief financial officer, out of his Connecticut mansion in handcuffs. MSNBC focused on the congressional hearings, where senators grilled former board members about their roles in the company's decades of fraud. "Vox, highlight any mentions of overseas operations," May instructed, her eyes fixed on the screens. "Processing," the AI responded. 17 new arrests reported in the last 6 hours across Europe and Asia. Primary focus on executive leadership in Wynn Corp's pharmaceutical subsidiaries. The dominoes were falling exactly as May had planned. Each arrest triggered new confessions, each confession led to more evidence, and each piece of evidence revealed deeper layers of corruption. The empire Patrick had built through intimidation and greed was unraveling at every seam. A breaking news alert flashed across all screens. The Justice Department had just announced the formation of a special task force dedicated solely to investigating Wynn Corp's global operations. May allowed herself a small smile. She had prepared for this moment for years, carefully documenting every connection, every illegal transaction, every covered-up death. "Your secure connection for the congressional testimony is ready for testing," Vox announced. "Would you like to run through the protocols?" "Yes," May replied, wheeling herself to the specialized broadcasting station she'd set up. The system was designed to maintain her privacy, while allowing her to present as May Carrington, the mysterious biotech CEO. Multiple layers of security and identity protection were in place, including voice modulation and sophisticated visual screening. She ran through the technical checks methodically, ensuring every safety measure was functioning perfectly. Tomorrow's testimony would be crucial, not just for the investigation, but for the thousands of lives affected by Wynn Corp's crimes. In the adjacent room, Evelyn lay propped up in her medical bed, watching the news on a large wall-mounted screen. Despite her weakened condition, her mind remained sharp as ever. She followed the developments with keen interest, occasionally making notes on a tablet May had modified for her limited mobility. "How are the preparations coming along?" Evelyn asked as May entered the room. "Everything's set," May replied, adjusting Evelyn's pillows. "The security protocols are solid. No one will be able to trace the connection back to us." Evelyn reached out and squeezed May's hand. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I had a good teacher," May smiled. "Someone who taught me that preparation matters as much as purpose." They spent the evening reviewing May's testimony materials. The evidence she had compiled was overwhelming. Internal memos showing deliberate manipulation of drug trial data. Technical specifications proving safety features had been disabled to cut costs. financial records revealing billions in hidden bribes to regulators. The next morning, May sat before her broadcasting station, dressed professionally but comfortably. The congressional hearing room appeared on her main screen, filled with senators and their staff. The committee chairman introduced her as May Carrington, CEO of Carrington Biosolutions and advocate for corporate accountability. Through careful voice modulation and digital screening, May presented her testimony with measured precision. She walked the committee through years of corporate malfeasance, explaining complex technical details in clear, compelling terms. The senators leaned forward in their seats as she revealed how WinCorp had deliberately sabotaged competing medical devices, leading to dozens of preventable deaths. "The pattern is clear," May stated, her disguised voice firm and authoritative. WinCorp didn't just break the law. They built their entire business model on the assumption that profits mattered more than human lives. From her bed, Evelyn watched the testimony with tears in her eyes. She saw in May's presentation not just the culmination of their years of work, but the triumph of compassion over cruelty. The little girl she'd rescued had grown into a force for justice that no one could have predicted. As the hearing concluded, messages began pouring in through secure channels. Other whistleblowers, people May had helped escape WinCorp's retaliation over the years, reached out to express their support. One message in particular caught her attention. "You gave us our voices back. Because of you, the truth finally has power again. Thank you for showing us the way." May sat back in her wheelchair, feeling the weight of the moment. She had done more than expose her father's crimes. She had created a pathway for others to fight back against corporate abuse. That evening, May wheeled herself to the fireplace in her private study. She opened a small safe hidden behind a panel and removed a manila envelope, the last remaining documents connecting her to her original identity: birth certificate, early medical records, even a few photographs that Evelyn had managed to save. The fire crackled as May fed the papers into the flames one by one. She watched as her birth name curled and blackened, as hospital records documenting her childhood condition turned to ash, as the last physical traces of Maisie Wynn disappeared forever. Rain began to fall outside, a gentle patter against the windows. May held the final photograph, a picture of herself as a small child, before everything changed. "Maisie died that day in the water," she whispered, letting the photograph fall into the flames. Standing slowly, using her leg braces for support, May looked around at the room filled with evidence of her new life: advanced medical patents, humanitarian awards, blueprints for future innovations. Her voice grew stronger, more resolute. But May built the future. She moved to the light switch and paused, watching the last document crumble in the fireplace. Then she turned off the lights and made her way outside. The quiet drizzle fell around her, washing away the past with each cool drop. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the empty halls of the abandoned WinCorp facility. May moved slowly through the building, her wheelchair making soft sounds against the polished marble floors. The building stood as a ghost of its former self, stripped of furniture, artwork, and the pretense of power that had once filled these corridors. She paused at a particular intersection, her hand gripping the wheel of her chair tightly. The memory washed over her with startling clarity. Being 5 years old, Patrick wheeling her down these same halls, his practiced smile never quite reaching his eyes. The way employees would quickly look away, their gazes sliding past her like she was invisible. Even then, she had sensed something was wrong, though she couldn't have named it. "You'll understand when you're older," Patrick had said that day, his voice carrying that false warmth she'd later learned to recognize as manipulation. "Some people just don't know how to handle different." May shook off the memory and continued down the hall. The demolition crews would arrive in 2 days, reducing this monument to corporate greed to rubble. But first, she needed to witness something, to stand in the spaces that had once defined her father's power and reclaim them on her own terms. The executive boardroom doors loomed ahead, their heavy oak panels still bearing the gold leaf WinCorp logo. May pushed them open, the hinges creaking in protest. Afternoon light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The massive conference table had been removed, leaving only marks on the carpet where it had once stood. She wheeled herself to the head of the room where Patrick's chair had dominated countless meetings. May had discovered years ago that he'd had recording devices installed in the walls, paranoid measures to gather leverage on his executives. Most of the recordings had been destroyed when the scandal broke, but May's team had recovered this one. With practiced movements, she retrieved a small device from her bag and connected it to the ancient wiring still hidden in the walls. Static crackled. Then Patrick's voice filled the room, harsh and cruel. "I don't care about the safety reports, bury them. Anyone who speaks up loses everything. Their career, their reputation, their future. I'll make sure they never work again. Is that clear enough for you?" May listened to the entire recording. Threats, bribes, casual mentions of arranged accidents. Her father's true voice, stripped of its public polish. When the recording finished, she pulled out her own secure device and began speaking, her voice clear and steady. Power built on silence never survives truth. She encrypted the file with multiple layers of protection, then uploaded it through a series of anonymous channels to major media outlets. Within hours, it would become yet another piece of evidence in the ongoing investigation into WinCorp's decades of corruption. The sun was setting by the time May returned to the island. The familiar scent of Evelyn's cooking, a simple pasta dish tonight, greeted her as she entered their home. They ate quietly, the only sounds being the gentle clink of forks against plates and the distant crash of waves against the shore. "Did you find what you were looking for today?" Evelyn asked softly, studying May's face with gentle concern. May took a moment before answering, choosing her words carefully. "Did I find peace, you mean?" Evelyn nodded. "No," May admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, I haven't found peace." She paused, then added with more conviction, "But I've found purpose." As if on cue, they heard the distinctive whir of rotors outside. May's automated delivery drone was landing with its evening cargo. She wheeled herself to the landing pad and retrieved a thick envelope bearing the logo of an African NGO. Back inside, she opened the package to find detailed blueprints and implementation requests for her medical technology. The organization wanted to establish healing centers in underserved communities, using her innovations to help children who would otherwise be left behind. May looked up at Evelyn and smiled faintly. "Then let's keep building." The autumn breeze carried a slight chill as May wheeled herself into Evelyn's bedroom, carrying a tablet filled with the day's reports from the Maisie Initiative. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, casting a soft glow on Evelyn's tired face. Though frail, her eyes still held that familiar spark of intelligence and warmth that had guided May through the darkest days of her childhood. "I have some news from the Lagos Center," May said, settling beside the bed. She adjusted Evelyn's pillows with practiced care, noting how thin her mentor had become. "Remember that girl I told you about? Sarah, the one who lost both legs in the accident?" Evelyn's face brightened. "The mathematician's daughter. Yes." May smiled, pulling up a video on her tablet. "She took her first steps yesterday with our new neural interface system. Watch." The screen showed a young girl, perhaps 12, standing between parallel bars. Her new prosthetic legs gleamed under fluorescent lights as she took careful, determined steps. Her father stood nearby, tears streaming down his face as he counted each step aloud in his native language. 17 steps, May said softly. She hadn't walked in 3 years. Evelyn reached out with a trembling hand to touch the screen. "Beautiful," she whispered. "And the school in Guatemala?" "Opened last week. Full enrollment already." May scrolled through more photos. "We've got 30 children with spinal injuries starting physical therapy, and 15 more scheduled for corrective surgeries next month. The local doctors are already training on our systems." "Show me their faces," Evelyn requested, her voice growing fainter. "I want to see them all." May spent the next hour sharing stories and images. A boy in Romania learning to use his new arm, twin girls in Vancouver receiving experimental treatment for a rare genetic condition, a teenager in Bangkok designing his own mobility aids using May's open-source templates. With each story, Evelyn's smile grew warmer, even as her breathing became more labored. "You've built something remarkable," Evelyn said during a pause. "Something that will outlast both of us." May set down the tablet, her throat tightening. "We built it together." "May." Evelyn's voice took on an urgent tone. "When it's time, I want you to take my ashes to the cove, where I found you." May gripped Evelyn's hand. "Don't talk like that. The new treatment dash." "Please," Evelyn interrupted gently. "It's where this story began. It should be where mine ends." After a long moment, May nodded. "Of course. And one more thing." Evelyn gestured to the tablet. "I want to record something, for them. For all the ones who'll come after." May set up the tablet's camera, positioning it carefully. Evelyn insisted on sitting up straighter, smoothing her silver hair with dignity. When she spoke, her voice carried a strength that belied her physical weakness. "If you're reading this, someone chose to save you. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you're angry. Maybe you don't understand why this happened to you. I found a little girl in the waves once, discarded by someone who should have protected her. She taught me that saving one life can save thousands more. So here's what I want you to know. You're not alone. You're not broken. And someday, when you're strong again, choose to save someone else. That's how we build the future, one act of mercy at a time." May stopped the recording, her vision blurred with tears. Evelyn lay back, exhausted but satisfied. "That's enough for today," she said softly. "Tell me about the new research center in Seoul tomorrow." The next few days passed in a gentle rhythm of stories, memories, and quiet moments. May noticed Evelyn sleeping more, eating less. The doctors came and went, their faces growing more grave with each visit. Still, Evelyn insisted on hearing every update from the initiative's global centers. One peaceful morning, as dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and grays, May woke to Vox's gentle alert. "Ms. Carr's vital signs are declining." May rushed to Evelyn's room, taking her place in the familiar chair. She held Evelyn's hand, feeling its slight warmth. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open briefly. "My brilliant girl," she whispered. "I'm here," May said, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "I know." Evelyn's lips curved in a faint smile. "You always were." Her breathing slowed, became shallow. May sat perfectly still, watching the rise and fall of Evelyn's chest become gentler and gentler until, like a tide going out, it simply stopped. The morning light filled the room with a quiet radiance as May pressed her forehead to their clasped hands. Later that day, May made her way to the cove alone. The water was unusually calm, almost mirror-like, reflecting the late afternoon sun. She carried a simple wooden box containing Evelyn's ashes, her wheelchair easily navigating the path they had traveled together countless times. At the water's edge, May stopped. This was where her life had truly begun, where Evelyn had found a half-drowned child and chosen to save her, the moment that had set everything else in motion. With careful movements, May opened the box. The breeze was gentle, almost reverent, as she released the ashes. They scattered across the water's surface like stardust, slowly dissolving into the sea that had once brought them together. A single tear rolled down May's cheek as she watched the last traces disappear into the waves. The tide pulled softly at the shore, eternal and unchanging. "Log updated," Vox's quiet voice came through her chair's speaker. "Evelyn Carr, origin point." May nodded, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. "She was my beginning." 1 year after Evelyn's passing, May stood before a full-length mirror in her private dressing room, adjusting the sleek exosuit that seamlessly integrated with her wheelchair. The custom-designed system, a marvel of bioengineering and robotics, represented everything the Maisie initiative stood for: dignity through innovation, strength through adaptation. The gala venue, a restored 19th-century theater in Boston, hummed with anticipation. Through the walls, May could hear the elegant murmur of hundreds of guests, world leaders, tech innovators, medical pioneers, and children whose lives had been transformed by the initiative's work. None of them had ever seen her face. VOX, security status? May asked, smoothing the fabric of her midnight blue dress. All parameters normal, the AI responded through her private earpiece. Facial recognition scramblers active. Guest list verified. Medical team on standby. May touched the simple silver pendant at her throat, Evelyn's last gift to her. The weight of it centered her, reminded her of quiet evenings spent planning this very moment. She picked up the metallic mask she'd worn for years during video appearances, studying its familiar contours. "Time check," she said softly. 7 minutes to curtain, Ms. Carrington." A gentle knock at the door. "Ms. Carrington, they're ready for you." May took a deep breath, remembering Evelyn's words during their countless practice sessions. Stand tall, speak truth, change lives. She adjusted her chair's position and moved toward the door. The backstage area was deliberately cleared, leaving only essential staff who had signed extensive NDAs. May could see the edge of the stage through the heavy curtains, where a podium waited under carefully arranged lights. The audience's anticipation was almost tangible. A young technician approached with a tablet. "Final sound check?" May nodded, speaking clearly into her microphone. "Testing, voice modulation off." Her natural voice, unused in public for decades, felt strange without its usual digital disguise. The house lights dimmed. A video began playing on the massive screen behind the stage, highlights from the Maisie Initiative's work around the world. Children taking their first steps with new prosthetics. Families reunited after medical crises. Schools opening in remote regions. Hospitals rising from empty fields. The initiative's logo appeared, a simple origami rabbit folded from a blueprint. May smiled faintly at the private joke, a reminder of the stuffed rabbit she'd clutched on that fatal day so long ago. 30 seconds, Vox announced in her ear. May positioned herself in the wings, her mask glinting under the stage lights. The video concluded with the initiative's tagline, "Building futures, restoring hope." A warm voice filled the theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of the Maisie Initiative, May Carrington." The audience erupted in applause as May guided her chair forward. The exosuit hummed almost imperceptibly, responding to her neural inputs with perfect precision. She stopped at the podium, facing the sea of expectant faces. Camera flashes sparkled throughout the crowd despite the strict no photography policy. For a moment, May simply looked out at them, still wearing her mask. She saw children with prosthetic limbs sitting beside parents who had mortgaged everything for treatment. She saw doctors who had learned her techniques, engineers who had built on her designs, teachers who had opened their classrooms to her programs. Then, with deliberate grace, she reached up and removed her mask. The gasp was audible, a collective intake of breath from hundreds of throats. Phones appeared despite security measures, their small lights dotting the darkness like stars. "Good evening," May said, her unaltered voice carrying clearly through the perfect acoustics. "I was born Maisie Wynn." The silence deepened. In the front row, an older reporter actually dropped his pen. "I should have died a long time ago," May continued, her voice steady. "My father tried to make sure of that. But someone gave me a second chance. A brilliant, compassionate woman named Evelyn Carr found me on a beach and chose to save me. She taught me that survival isn't enough. What matters is what we build after." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Every child in this room who has received care through our initiative, please stand if you're able, or raise your hand if you prefer." Dozens of young people rose or lifted their hands, some with prosthetic limbs, others in wheelchairs, all with straight backs and proud faces. "Look around," May said to the audience. "These aren't just success stories. They're the next generation of builders, thinkers, and healers. They're not defined by what they've lost or what was taken from them. They're defined by what they'll create." She gestured to the screen behind her where new images appeared, blueprints for hospitals, schools, research centers. Today, the Maisie Initiative isn't just announcing new projects. We're announcing a new era. Every child who receives care through our programs will also receive an education in medicine, engineering, or any field they choose. Every hospital we build will include a school. Every research breakthrough will be open source. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. May waited for it to subside. My father tried to throw away a broken child. Instead, he created something he couldn't control. Hope. Unstoppable, uncontainable hope. And that's what I'm offering to every forgotten child, every desperate parent, every person told they're too damaged to matter. Hope isn't just an emotion, it's a technology. It's a choice. It's a future we build together. She backed away from the podium as the audience rose to their feet. The ovation was deafening, punctuated by tears and cheers. May nodded once, then turned and exited the stage with the same quiet dignity she'd entered with. In the privacy of the backstage area, May checked her secure tablet. A live feed showed the completion ceremony of their newest hospital in rural Peru. Solar panels gleaming on the roof, a small crowd of local families gathering for the opening. "Let's begin phase 2, she whispered, her finger hovering over the activation command that would initiate dozens of similar projects worldwide. As she pressed the button, she heard Evelyn's voice through her personal archives, as clear and certain as ever. "It's not what we survive that defines us. It's what we build after." 6 months after May's revelation shook the world, she sat composed before the United Nations Human Rights Panel in Geneva. The Grand Chamber hummed with tension as delegates from around the globe studied her with a mix of awe and skepticism. Her exosuit gleamed under the harsh lights, each movement precise and deliberate. "Ms. Carrington, or should we say Ms. Wynne," began the committee chair, a stern-faced woman from Norway. "Your actions have triggered the largest corporate accountability cascade in history. Yet some would argue your methods crossed ethical lines. How do you respond?" May's fingers traced the smooth surface of her chair's control panel, a habit she'd developed during long negotiations. The massive screens behind her cycled through news headlines. May Carrington, hero or vigilante. The woman who brought down an empire. Ethics board questions. Carrington's methods. "Distinguished members of the panel," May began, her voice clear and unwavering. "When I was 5 years old, my father decided my disability made me unworthy of his legacy. He chose to erase me rather than accept me. That was his first abuse of power, but far from his last." The chamber fell silent. Even the usually restless journalists stilled their cameras. "In the years that followed," May continued, "I watched from the shadows as he built an empire on similar choices. Every whistleblower silenced, every safety regulation circumvented, every life deemed expendable in pursuit of profit. I didn't break this system, I simply showed the world it was already broken." A representative from Brazil leaned forward. "But the deception, Ms. Carrington, the false identities, the shell companies, the years of calculated planning. How do you justify these methods?" May's lips curved in a slight smile. "Would you have preferred I announced my survival on social media? Filed a complaint with the ethics board?" A murmur of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the chamber. "I chose methods that protected the vulnerable while exposing the powerful. Every leak was verified, every accusation documented. I simply created a pathway for truth to emerge." The screens behind her shifted to display global data. Thousands of children fitted with May's neural prosthetics, hundreds of schools equipped with adaptive technology, dozens of hospitals running on her open-source medical systems. "This is my true work," May said, gesturing to the images. "Everything else was just clearing the ground to build it." In a small village in Kenya, a young girl took her first steps using one of May's lightweight prosthetic legs. Her mother filmed the moment on a donated tablet, tears streaming down her face as her daughter walked toward her. The video feed streamed directly to the UN chamber. Similar scenes played out across the screens. A boy in Bangladesh controlling a robotic arm to draw his first picture. Teenagers in Colombia graduating from a Mazy Initiative Tech Academy. Doctors in rural India using May's diagnostic AI to treat patients in remote areas. "Your technology has undeniably changed lives," acknowledged a representative from Germany. "But the question remains, did the ends justify the means?" May's response was immediate. "Ask them." She gestured to the screens where more children appeared, some in wheelchairs, others with prosthetics, all wearing the proud smiles of achievement. Ask the families who can now afford treatment. Ask the researchers who can freely share their findings. Ask anyone who was told they were too broken to matter. The chamber erupted in applause, led by representatives from developing nations. The chair tapped her gavel for order, but her eyes had softened. The panel recognizes the extraordinary impact of the Maisie Initiative, she announced. We also acknowledge the complex ethical questions raised by this case. However, in light of the overwhelming evidence of positive global change, she paused, consulting her colleagues. We hereby commend May Carrington for her contributions to human rights, disability access, and ethical technology standards. As the formal commendation was read into record, May's tablet quietly displayed new data. Another hospital opening in rural Brazil, a school in Vietnam launching its first biotech program, a prosthetics factory staffed entirely by former patients beginning production in Morocco. That evening, in secure facilities around the world, children gathered around screens and tablets to share their stories. A girl in Mexico proudly demonstrated her new walking prosthetics to classmates. Dr. Angel made these, she explained, pointing to the small origami rabbit logo. She was like us, but she built the future. In a rehabilitation center in Thailand, teenagers practiced with neural-mapped arm prosthetics, their movements becoming more natural by the day. Their instructor, a former WinCorp whistleblower, showed them news footage of May's testimony. She didn't just give us new limbs, the instructor said. She gave us back our dignity. Later that night in her private office overlooking Lake Geneva, May accessed her secure servers one last time. She scrolled through folders of evidence, surveillance logs, and contingency plans, the weapons she'd gathered for her war against Patrick's empire. With methodical precision, she began deleting them, folder by folder. Vox's calm voice filled the room. Confirming deletion of Operation Legacy files. Are you certain, May? Yes, she replied, watching years of careful planning disappear into digital oblivion. We don't need these anymore. The last file contained her original birth certificate, Maisie Elizabeth Wynne, born to privilege, sentenced to death by the same. She deleted that too. On her tablet, a new alert appeared. Another open-source prosthetic design was ready for release, this one specifically for children under 5. May uploaded the blueprints to the global server, making them freely available to medical facilities worldwide. As confirmation messages flooded in from doctors and engineers eager to implement the design, she smiled faintly. The next morning, May's helicopter touched down on the familiar shore of Evelyn's Island. The sea breeze carried the same salt tang she'd first tasted as a terrified child. She guided her chair along the well-worn path to the cove where everything had begun. In her lap, she carried a simple stone tablet, carved with Evelyn's name and a single line. She saved one child, who saved thousands. May placed it carefully at the water's edge, where the morning sun caught the polished surface. Home coordinates restored, Vox announced quietly. Welcome back, May. The tide lapped gently at the rocks, its rhythm unchanged by empires fallen or lives transformed. May watched the waves, remembering a night long ago when a stranger had pulled a broken child from these same waters. Thank you for saving me, she whispered, her words carried away by the eternal sea breeze. The morning sun cast long shadows across May's private lab, its rays filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the same coastline where her life had changed 2 decades ago. The lab, a perfect blend of cutting-edge technology and natural elements, hummed quietly with the sound of advanced equipment and gentle ocean waves. May sat at her desk, her fingers tracing the edges of a worn photograph. The image captured a moment frozen in time. A young girl in a wheelchair, her face bright with curiosity despite the trauma she'd recently endured, sitting beside a woman whose weathered face radiated kindness and strength. Evelyn's eyes in the photo held that familiar mix of determination and gentleness that had saved May's life. 20 years, May whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the soft whir of nearby machines. Vox, Her AI assistant adjusted the room's lighting in response to her contemplative mood. She placed the photo carefully back into its protective sleeve and turned to face the recording setup she'd prepared. The camera activated automatically, its lens focusing on her face as she settled into position. "To the future researchers of Carrington Biosolutions," May began, her voice clear and measured. "I'm recording this message on the 20th anniversary of what some might call my second birth, the day I was pulled from these waters and given another chance at life." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "You might know this company as a global leader in biotech innovation. You might have studied our breakthroughs in neural mapping or adaptive technology. But I need you to understand something fundamental. This company was never about profit. It was about second chances, about creating a world where survival isn't just possible, it's beautiful." May's eyes drifted to the photo again as she continued. "Everything we've built here started with one person who chose to save a child others had discarded. She taught me that true innovation isn't just about creating new technology. It's about creating new possibilities for those who've been told they have none." She completed the recording with detailed instructions for its preservation. The message would be sealed in a time capsule, marked for opening on the 50th anniversary of the Maisie Initiative. Vox confirmed the encryption and storage protocols as May wheeled away from the recording station. Outside, the morning had bloomed into a perfect day. May made her way along a winding path toward what had once been just a dream in Evelyn's journal, a massive greenhouse complex that seemed to emerge organically from the island's rocky terrain. The greenhouse stood as a testament to both nature and innovation. Its transparent panels shifted automatically to optimize sunlight, while inside, advanced hydroponic systems merged seamlessly with traditional soil beds. But it wasn't the technology that made this place special. It was the children. As May entered through the automatic doors, she was greeted by the controlled chaos of young minds at work. In one corner, a group of teenagers huddled around a workbench, their hands busy assembling small drones designed for pollination. Another cluster of children worked at adaptive computer stations, their various mobility aids and prosthetics, allowing them to code neural implant updates with ease. Near the central garden, younger children learned about sustainable farming, their small hands working with soil recovery systems that could transform barren earth into fertile ground. Each child here had a story, some orphaned, others disabled, all once considered disposable by a world too busy to see their potential. A young girl named Sarah, who used one of May's latest prosthetic designs, noticed her entrance first. "Doctor, May," she called out, her excitement causing others to look up from their work. Sarah had been found in a struggling orphanage 6 months ago, her missing limb deemed too expensive to treat by traditional healthcare systems. May moved through the greenhouse, stopping to check on projects and offer encouragement. She reached a station where a boy named Marcus was debugging a drone's navigation system. His fingers flew across the adaptive keyboard May had designed specifically for his unique motor challenges. "Were you always this strong?" Marcus asked suddenly, looking up from his work. His eyes held that familiar mix of pain and hope May recognized from her own childhood. May carefully knelt beside his wheelchair, making sure they were at eye level. The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning beyond its simple words. She thought of those first terrifying days after Evelyn found her, of learning to trust again, of discovering strength she never knew she possessed. "No," she answered honestly, her voice gentle but firm. "But someone believed I could be." Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. He turned back to his work with renewed determination, his posture just a little straighter. May continued her rounds through the greenhouse, pausing to admire the vertical gardens that produced food for the island's growing community. The plants thrived under the care of children who, like them, just needed the right environment to grow. As the afternoon approached, May made her way outside. A boat was approaching the island's dock, carrying new caregivers, teachers, therapists, and medical staff who had chosen to dedicate themselves to this unique mission. They had been carefully selected and extensively vetted, each understanding the sacred trust they were being given. Above, A formation of solar-powered drones glided silently across the sky, their bird-like shapes casting brief shadows on the ground below. These weren't just surveillance tools. They were part of a larger network that maintained communication, monitored environmental conditions, and ensured the safety of everyone on the island. May watched the sun begin its descent behind the familiar cliffs, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The same cliffs that had once represented isolation now stood as guardians of this sanctuary. The waves that had once nearly claimed her life now carried new beginnings to these shores. She stood there watching with quiet determination as the new arrivals began unloading their supplies. Each person who stepped onto the island's soil represented another thread in the tapestry of hope she and Evelyn had begun weaving 2 decades ago. "From the wreckage we rise," May whispered, her words carried away by the same eternal sea breeze that had witnessed her own rescue so many years ago. If you enjoyed the story of Patrick and Maisie, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.